In the rolling hills of the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist curls around ancient oak trees and the scent of pine needles mingles with the earthy fragrance of fresh soil, there is a world of secrets, small-town eccentricities, and of course, moonshine. The folks who call these mountains home have stories that could fill the pages of novels and the ears of any traveler willing to listen. But one story stands out among the many, an unforgettable day when Tickle, the notorious moonshiner, decided to dig a well by himself, only to find that the absence of his partner, Tim, would lead to unexpected consequences. It was a warm, hazy morning, the kind that invited the sounds of birds chirping and the gentle hum of bees as they flitted from flower to flower. Tickle had been up since the crack of dawn, his boots crunching against the gravel driveway as he stumbled out of his cabin. His hair, a messy tumble of curls, stuck out from underneath his worn-out hat, and his plaid shirt clung to his weathered frame. He squinted into the morning sun, a deep sigh escaping his lips. Another day in paradise, he muttered, but it was clear that something was gnawing at him. Tim, his partner in the moonshine business, had been dragging his feet lately. That operation was slowing down, not because they lacked the resources or the skills, but because Tim had developed a bit of a problem with motivation. His idea of a good time didn't exactly involve working until the job was done. It involved a bit too much time spent on the front porch with a bottle of something strong, staring off into the horizon like a philosopher lost in deep thought. Tickle, on the other hand, was a man of action. He was always on the go, always thinking of the next move, always trying to better himself and his operation. That morning, as he stood staring at the half-dug hole in his backyard, he realized something had to change. They needed a well. They needed water for the distillery, for their crops, for their daily lives, but digging a well wasn't exactly an easy job, especially not for a pair of moonshiners who preferred to deal with copper pipes rather than shovels. Tickle scratched his stubbled chin, eyeing the hole. He had started digging it the day before, a half-baked idea spurred by a desperation for self-sufficiency. But now, with Tim nowhere in sight and no word from him, Tickle was faced with the reality that the hole wasn't going to dig itself. Where the hell is Tim? Tickle muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. He said he'd help me with this. His patience, however, was running thin. He had already tried calling Tim several times that morning, but the man had yet to pick up. His phone was probably dead, or worse, he was too busy sipping whiskey to care. With a final huff, Tickle grabbed the old shovel resting against the side of the house, muttering to himself as he began to dig once more. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and still, Tim had not shown up. Tickle's muscles ached from the unrelenting labor and his temper was starting to flare. If Tim wasn't going to help, then Tickle was going to finish this well himself, whether Tim liked it or not. Finally, when the sweat on Tickle's brow had turned to a sheen of frustration, he saw a familiar figure ambling down the gravel road toward the cabin. It was Tim, stumbling along with a flask in hand and a lazy grin plastered on his face. He was clearly in no hurry, his boots kicking up dust as he took slow, measured steps. "About time you showed up," Tickle snapped, his voice tight with irritation. Tim squinted at him, his eyes bloodshot from a night of drinking. "You need something, Tickle? Thought I heard you callin' for me earlier, but I was, busy. Busy." Tickle's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Busy with what, Tim? Playing cards with the ghost of your last bad decision?" Tim let out a low chuckle, oblivious to Tickle's growing frustration. "Nah, just, thinking about life, you know?" Tickle shook his head. "I've been digging this hole by myself all day, Tim. And where have you been?" "I needed help." Tim's grin faltered slightly, but he shrugged nonchalantly. I'm here now, ain't I? Yeah. Well, it's a little late for that, Tickle grumbled, tossing the shovel to the ground. I've done most of the work. Now, we just need to finish it, and I'm not about to do it alone. Tim scratched his stubbled chin, looking at the hole with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. Don't know if I'm up for more of this diggin' business today, Tickle. Got something else I was thinking about doing. Like what? Nappin' in the shade with your flask? Maybe, Tim said, a sly grin creeping across his face. Tickle, unable to hold back any longer, let out a frustrated sigh. You know what, Tim? Fine. If you're not gonna help, then I'll do it myself. I don't need you for this. Tim's face lit up with sudden interest. Wait, what are you saying? You're gonna finish the well? I've been serious all day, Tim, Tickle snapped. Now get out of my way. I've got work to do. With that, Tickle grabbed the shovel once more and resumed his digging, his movements more aggressive than before. Tim watched him for a moment, his grin widening as if he were watching a show. Well, hell, Tim drawled, taking another swig from his flask. If you're gonna be stubborn about it, then go right ahead. But don't say I didn't warn ye. Tickle barely heard him. His mind was focused on one thing: finishing this well. He wasn't going to let Tim's laziness ruin another day. It wasn't just about the well. It was about proving a point. As the hours dragged on and the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Tickle found himself growing increasingly exhausted. The hole had grown deeper, and so had his frustration. His body ached, his hands blistered from the shovel, but he refused to stop. This was his work, his responsibility. But then, in the fading light of the evening, something happened. Tickle's mind began to wander, his frustration morphing into a kind of delirium. The exhaustion hit him like a wave, and soon, his thoughts weren't so much about the well anymore. They were about the mountain, about the land, about the life he had chosen for himself. And with that, Tickle did something unexpected. He dropped the shovel with a thud, sat back on his heels, and looked over at Tim. I can't do it alone anymore, he muttered. I can't keep doing everything myself. Tim didn't say anything at first. He just watched Tickle, taking another slow sip from his flask. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. You don't have to, Tickle, Tim said, his voice surprisingly sincere. We're in this together, whether you like it or not. Tickle felt a warmth spread through him, a mix of gratitude and frustration. He'd been trying to do it all himself for so long, but he'd forgotten what it meant to rely on someone else. Even Tim, with all his flaws, was a part of this operation. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. With a sigh, Tickle leaned back and wiped the sweat from his brow. All right, Tim, let's finish this well. Tim grinned, finally setting down the flask. I was wondering when you'd ask for my help. The two of them, tired but determined, picked up the shovel together. As the sky turned purple and the stars began to twinkle above, they worked side by side, knowing that this well, like their friendship, would take time and effort, but in the end, it would be worth it. And maybe, just maybe, they'd have a drink together afterward. In the smoky hills of the Appalachian Mountains, where the smell of corn whiskey wafts through the trees like an old-timey ghost, the Moonshiners are always up to something interesting. The show is a raw, gritty, and wild portrayal of people making liquor the old-fashioned way. It's a glimpse into a world that's part myth, part history, and all passion. This time, the spotlight falls on Tickle, one of the most colorful and unpredictable personalities the show has ever seen. Tickle is known for his antics, his big smile, and his deep, throaty laugh, often making him the comic relief amidst the gritty, hard-working atmosphere of moonshining. But today, things aren't so lighthearted. No, today, Tickle is upset. And when Tickle gets upset, you know there's going to be trouble. It all starts with a problem as old as the hills themselves. Digging a well. Not just any well, mind you, but one that would help supply water to their moonshine operation, a crucial part of any distillery. The task seemed simple enough, but Tickle wasn't about to dig it alone. That's where Tim, his longtime partner in crime, comes into play. The sun was hot, and the sweat was pouring down the backs of the Moonshiners as they stared at the spot where they wanted to dig. Tickle was pacing back and forth, his boots crunching the dry earth beneath him as he muttered to himself. Tim, on the other hand, was sitting in the shade, sipping on some homemade tea and taking his sweet time. "You gotta be kidding me, Tim," Tickle exclaimed, throwing his arms up in the air. "I can't do this all by myself. We need that well, and we need it now. This moonshine isn't gonna make itself." Tim, ever the relaxed and practical one, just shrugged. "Well, Tickle, I got a lot of work to do here, and this well ain't gonna dig itself either. You want it done right, you gotta put in the work." Tickle didn't like that response. Not one bit. He could feel his blood starting to boil, his temper beginning to rise. He wasn't in the mood for Tim's nonchalant attitude today. It was hot, the work was hard, and he was running out of patience. "You know what, Tim?" Tickle said through gritted teeth. "Fine. If you're not gonna help, then I'll just do it myself. I'll dig this damn well all by myself. You'll see." With that,